Hello, this is Opera Unbound, a podcast that breaks the barriers between opera singers and the audience. We will cover the process, challenges, stereotypes, and inspirations associated with opera.
If you like the content that we're putting out and you'd love to see more, make sure you subscribe to our channel as well as share it with all your friends.
Welcome back. This is our season finale.
Dun dun dun.
We're going to be talking about the most controversial topic in our field. Opera is dying. In my opinion, if it's dying the most operatic death it can. So long, so drawn out.
Seriously, this thing's been reading Pagliaccio forever. Like probably a century or more. It's a long, painful death.
Yeah. Definitely. So we're going to talk about this subject in kind of three areas. We're going to talk about the statistics and everything involved with that. We're going to talk about a definition of dying, and kind of an offshoot of that is going to be opera and popular culture, which is obviously how most people think of whether an art form is relevant or not. Mm-hmm. We're going to kick it off talking about some stats, and I did a lot of statistical Googling.
You gave it a goog and you found some stuff out.
Yeah, let's kind of talk about the number of performances of opera in the world. Obviously, we didn't use the 2019-2020 season. I think you know why. So we're using 2018/19 season. There were 25,000 performances. And if you look back in history, that's a pretty steady number for the last 10 years at least. And then attendance to those performances. In the United States in 2019, 2.8 million people attended an opera, which in itself, okay, 2.8 million, that's a lot of people. When you compare that to our population of adults, in 2019, there were around 220 million adults in the US. So that's only slightly over a percentage of the population physically going to the opera. I wanted to compare this to a couple different things. I wanted to compare it to Germany. Germany has the most operas performed out of any country in the world. They make up about a third of the performances. So out of those 25,000 performances in 2018/19, they accounted for 8.7 of them, 8.7 thousand of them.
Okay.
Whereas the US, it's only about 2 to 2.5K. That Germany's just, they love opera. Germany is kind of Mecca.
Yeah, especially when you think of not only the population differences, but the size of the country versus ours. I mean, it's just crazy. There's like opera all the time.
Germany is about the size of Minnesota, and nearly every mid-sized German city has an opera house. Germany is home to one of every 7 of the world's opera houses. So, I mean, they really just have a ton. Mm-hmm. And going back to what I was talking about, the attendance. So in 2018/19, 4 million people in Germany attended the opera. Now, I think when you look at both of these statistics, there are going to be some people who are traveling from outside those countries. I think it's going to be a small percentage, but I think we should at least, mention that.
Yeah, that's fair.
The population of Germany is around 87 million, so 4 million people attending the opera there is almost 4.5% of their population. Mm-hmm. And that data, how many people attend the operas, the 2.8 million, that comes from Opera America's report on the field at a glance from 2019, and then the numbers from Germany come from an article from Christian Science Monitor. They were talking about how people are making a living during the pandemic. Lucky for us, they used some statistics.
Yeah. In case we were wondering, now we know. So.
Yeah. I also looked at the National Endowment for the Arts. They do studies from time to time, too. Back in 1992, they did a study about, attendance of theater and arts, and found some statistics in there about opera specifically. 6.1 million people attended the opera in 1992. So we have nearly half the amount of people attending the opera over a 30-year period. So when you're looking at the statistics of opera in live performance, it doesn't look great.
No, it does not.
But when you look at it consumed via media, CDs, movies, live streams, when we talk about in today's terms, the numbers are better. So from that same NEA study in 1992, they say a total of 18.1% of the population, or 33.6 million adults, watched or listened to opera on the media. That's a huge difference.
Oh, totally.
That's five times as many people. Now, I had to go digging to find a close enough year that I could find data on people listening to opera. And unfortunately, I couldn't find one that didn't also include classical music. So this is for both classical music and opera, which there is a fair amount of overlap when it comes to the audience members. A lot of audience members who go to operas also go to classical music events, symphonies, stuff like that. That number from 2017, and that's also from National Endowment for the Arts study, is 35.2 million, or about 20% of the population. So it actually grew.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, even if we say half of those people only go to opera, which I would be suspect that it's only half.
Yeah.
That still is a massive difference from the 92 study. And
yeah, well, and as we discussed on the last podcast we did together about accessibility and how we really think that live streaming is going to bring new audience members, maybe not through the doors, but it's going to bring it into their homes. I mean, radio changed people's lives when that became something that everybody could have in their home and the entertainment available to them. The same thing with the television set. And now that companies are open to live streaming their operas, I think that they're going to see a greater amount of revenue from that, one, but also community engagement.
yeah,
Because there are people who live in areas where there isn't an opera house that is convenient for them to go to, or like we talked about before, it may not be accessible to them for whatever disability they might have.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that it is the future, and as we get internet more easily available to everybody in our country and really throughout the world, but we're just talking the United States right now, throughout our entire country, not just in, major metropolitan areas and suburbs and stuff like that. It's going to really revolutionize that whole thing. As you were talking, Rachel, I was just sitting there thinking, and I'm also hoping that I have the story correct, but I'm pretty sure I do. Who's to say that we won't, through this process of having opera be live streamed and on YouTube, that we won't find more stories like Kristen Chenoweth. Now, I know she's really more of a musical theater person, but she learned how to sing opera, and she came from a small town in Oklahoma.
Right.
So, and she became one of the biggest singers really in the performing arts in the last century. And so this will help inspire not only people that just like the art form itself, but that's how I think we're going to get more people to come into the art form to be actual performers, is through that, which then, as we both know, the more you get into it yourself, a lot easier it is to help spread that joy to other people. So
Yeah,
it's going to be really good for everybody, honestly, even if the ticket sales at the door are less. I mean, we talked about it jokingly a couple days ago, where we need to find a way to be a better gateway drug for people.
Yeah.
And I think that live streaming and doing things online in creative ways is going to get us there.
Absolutely.
Even if our in-person stuff, quote unquote, suffers a little bit in the short term.
Yeah, and I want to come back to that point later. I want to kind of finish up what we're talking about with statistics, but in this Opera America Field at a Glance report, they do talk about the different ways that companies innovated when it came to how they program their seasons because of the pandemic. So I want to come back to that, but
Okay.
I want to finish talking about the statistics real quick.
All right, sounds good.
The last statistic I wanted to compare to was something that is more a part of quote unquote popular culture, and that is musicals. According to epictheaterensemble.org a survey conducted by Nielsen Scarborough, a total of 47 million Americans attended a live theater event of some sort, whether that's musicals, concerts, opera, that. Out of that number, 13 million people went to a Broadway play or musical. 13 million. That is like, let's see, we just round up. It's 4 times as many people that went to an opera, which actually isn't as large as a number as I thought it would be. I thought it was going to be a much bigger number.
Yeah, I would agree, especially because if you talk to non-opera people or people who are just out in the world, they would assume that musical theater is far more popular than that, because you see, I mean, every high school, now I know there's reasons why high schoolers don't do opera because the voice isn't even remotely mature enough to do it, but like that's where more people get exposed to that art form, so you would think it would be bigger than it actually is.
Yeah, when you look at the statistics, it doesn't look great for opera as a on-living art form. And we've talked about how we really think it comes down to how you are engaging with the community that you are presenting this art form in. If you cannot speak to what these people find important or interesting, entertaining, of course they're not going to come. And also having to break down those stupid barriers and ideas about opera.
Yeah,
I get it. My own mom, like every time my mom comes to watch me at the opera, she was always like, what do I wear? And I'm like, just wear clothing. No one cares.
It's true.
Just put clothes on. I don't care if you come in a 3-piece suit or a pair of overalls and some mud shoes. It's whatever,
Yeah,
I'm just glad you're in a seat.
exactly, because the level of, or lack thereof, of clothing is not going to impede the message that is being presented in front of you. It will not block your ears and your other senses, at least I don't think, anatomically or scientifically speaking, that it will block your experience by wearing, I don't know, Crocs and socks.
I think what people fear is that they'll get the side eye or, something like that. It might happen, but it also might happen if you're just out in public. I don't think the instances of it are that much higher. I mean, when I go to the opera, I go in jeans. I don't particularly dress up.
Yeah.
I have,
well,
but I don't always.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, people are going to judge you no matter what you do in today's society, so you just got to be you.
Yep.
Unless you're an asshole, then you might want to refrain on that one. But everything else, I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm getting older now, not that I'm super old, but I just care a lot less.
Yeah.
Because there's really nothing you can do with certain people. They're going to do whatever.
Do you have any stats that you found in your research that you want to share? Or
yeah, well, I'm looking at that same report, the 2019 Phil report, and one thing that we need to keep in mind that they mentioned in this is out of all the operas that were performed in the 2018-19 season that they did in all their different surveys, because I don't think they actually looked at every single company, because not every company belongs to Opera America.
Exactly. They only look at Opera America members. So
yeah,
their numbers won't include every company. So I think that there's probably something like 20% of opera companies don't belong to Opera America, and they're going to be probably the smaller companies.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair guess. 29% of all of them were written after 1970.
Of the operas that they performed?
Yeah, in the 18-19 season. I thought that it was going to be lower than that, so that's almost a third, right?
Yeah, that's great.
So that's really good. Now, granted, some of them that were in the top 5, one of them I don't really consider an opera, which is West Side Story. It's a great show, don't get me wrong. I don't really consider it an opera, but that's okay.
That's Bernstein, right?
Yeah, it's Bernstein, yeah.
Yeah, the Bernstein's, that's...
Same with Candide.
Yeah.
Candide is number 4.
Candide is technically considered an opera, but it's done by musical theater companies more than it's done by opera companies. So that becomes like a connotation versus a definition, like a dictionary definition.
Okay, fair enough. For those of you who are wondering, the top 5... Well, let's first do this. This is not going to be that surprising to people. The top 5 most performed works, just out of everything. Number 1, Bohème, Traviata, Carmen, Barber of Seville, and Butterfly. Okay, that's really not that shocking. That's pretty standard almost every single year. Now, the top 5 most produced in North American works were number 1, 3 Decembers, which is Jay Kegi. Number 2, we've talked about it a lot on this show. We might even talk about it again in this one, As One, which is the Laura Kaminsky transgender opera. Again, West Side Story, Candide, and then number 5, the one I wish I have seen by now, but I have not, Silent Night.
Oh, Silent Night's so good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's on my list. So that's, just in case people are wondering or taking score at home, that's it. Now, the other thing that I found interesting in this report, and it goes to a point that we've made multiple times on this podcast, is that the future is probably not going to change a whole lot. Like, the changes that we need to happen are not going to come from these behemoth companies.
Nope.
It's going to come from the smaller companies getting people in. And one thing that I found interesting is if your company, according to the ones that they looked at, has a budget of $1 million or less, you get more bang for your buck in terms of the development productivity is the dollars raised from contributions per dollar spent on fundraising. And what's interesting about this is, though they had 2 categories, essentially they had a 250,000 to $1 million and then less than 250,000. And both of those categories all rose from 2014 to 2018. In fact, the 250 to $1 million, they had a massive increase from 17 to 18. Like, it was like $1.50.
Wow.
Which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's quite a bit because they came down and now they're back up. I think that what those companies have to do, because they have less money to go around, they have to be much more strategic and creative and intelligent with how they're doing all this fundraising. And clearly it's working because they're getting more bang for their buck.
Awesome. Let's, I guess, quickly talk about the Opera America's COVID-19 impact on 2020.
Okay.
And the more about the programmatic innovation, because we mentioned that. So 2020, because of COVID, 1,800 performances were canceled. If you want to take the bigger numbers, so in the United States, about 2.5 thousand performances are done every year over the past 5 years. That really only leaves, I don't know, 10% were left uncanceled.
Yeah.
And obviously the impact that has not only on the companies, but the artists. And we're all aware of this. But the innovation that they did to keep people working and keep opera alive during the pandemic, formats of programming offered were filmed productions, outdoor performances, live streams. They say other. I don't know what they're calling other, but film production made up 37%, outdoor performances made up 26%, and live streams made up 24%. And I am glad that they made a distinction between film productions and live streams because they are different. Film production can have stops and starts and things like that, whereas a live stream is a live performance. They're just streaming it.
Yeah.
The type of programming offered via these formats, recitals and concerts, fully staged operas, interviews and lectures, abridged, semi-staged operas, activities for families and children. So recitals and concert programs made up 45% of the programming. Fully staged operas was 13. Abridged, semi-staged operas was 12. Oh, no, wait. The colors. No. Interviews and lectures was 12, and then abridged was 10%.
Okay.
Opera only made up 23% of like full opera or semi-staged opera only made up 23% of programming offered. And that really makes a lot of sense because of the number of people that are involved in making an opera and how COVID made that difficult. I'm really not surprised to see that it was mostly recitals and concerts.
Yeah. I'm actually kind of surprised that the interviews and all that stuff wasn't higher. Just because I think it would have been a really great opportunity, and maybe it's an opportunity missed, or maybe it's just in the works. I don't know. To just explain to people, more about the industry and about projects that are coming up.
Okay, so I guess we can move on to our definition stage. What do we consider dying? What do we want to do? Merriam-Webster?
Well, I think we all know what dying, like something that's dying is. I think it's something that is either on the outs or just not being done anymore. And I think that also you could make a case that the word dying, especially in this case, it's not a medical definition, is relative.
Yeah, drawing to an end or declining.
I would submit that I don't think it is, and that's not just me being biased. I think it's going through a reformation. And it's one of those things that there's a lot of dust being thrown up as we're trying to figure this all out, and eventually when that settles, hopefully that dying argument will actually die,
Yeah, and we talked a couple days ago when I brought up the idea of talking about opera as a dead language, like this idea that people want to say that it's dying. You have to meet kind of three categories when it comes to a dead language. There's no native speakers, there's no new words, and it's purely academic, ceremonial, or historical, which I actually don't think that opera checks any of those boxes.
Yeah.
There are plenty of people who perform opera and listen to opera, enough so that there are plenty of people you could consider native speakers of opera, right? There are hundreds of new works. We were just talking about Opera America has this database, North American works, and we were just looking at it, and in the last 10 years, over 200 new operas have been written and performed. And that's just amazing. And it's not a purely academic, ceremonial, or historic thing. Now, there are productions that are historic. There are opera companies that are very like, we do it exactly the way it's written in the score. And we're going to make the costumes exactly the way they were in the very first production. And that's fine. There's a place for that. There is an appreciation of that, actually, in its preservation of that amount of history. But yeah, I mean, I can think of plenty of productions that are not academic.
Some of them I've written. So yeah, that's really of those three arguments with the dead language that might have a little bit of weight, but that's only for certain kinds of people. I completely agree. This idea that it's dying, I mean, some of the most produced shows we see all the time as one, like we've mentioned, Amal and the Night Visitors. As we were talking about before we started this, Amal was one of the first operas to ever be put on TV.
Yep.
Thing's been around forever.
On NBC in like 1967, really kind of revitalized or, brought opera to the masses in a way that hadn't been done in, well, if you want to consider, anything after 1910, the modern era in the United States.
Yeah, there's lots of operas that are based on things that we already know, either like movies or they're tunes that we know. For example, Dead Man Walking was a movie first with Sean Penn.
Right.
Porgy and Bess. Everybody knows the tune Summertime. That most people don't know that comes from an opera.
Yeah.
It's not just Miles Davis or Louis Armstrong or Ella. As awesome as those people are, it came from an opera. Lots of people have seen the Sweeney Todd version with Johnny Depp.
Oh, right.
So
I thought you were going to say Bryn Terfel. I was like, yeah, Bryn Terfel. Awesome.
Yeah, well, he's great in it too, but doesn't have as wide of a reach as Johnny Depp does.
Yeah, sure.
This is a really cool list on here. So, and there's lots of companies that are doing it. Some of them that's like all that they do. Like we've talked about before, the Pacific Opera Project. Another really cool one that's in New York is Heartbeat Opera. They do modern versions of stuff, but they also have new works too.
Yeah, there's something like between 40 and 50 new opera productions every year, right? Is that what that statistic was?
Yeah, North American productions by you're talking premieres? Yeah, premieres. If you were to average this all out, yeah, it's like upper 40s, low 50s.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And nobody talks about that, but you know what? That's why we are right now.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of going, before we really get into like the whole pop culture thing, because we will get into that, I wanted to talk about two things. There was a 1A, 1A is part of it's a podcast on NPR. They did a interview with Anthony Davis, the composer of Malcolm X and the Central Park Five, Janae Bridges, and Mark Sorka, the CEO of Opera America. And this quote he said, and this was because the interviewer asked, like, is there a difference between American and European views on opera? And he was like, in Europe, French, German, and Italian repertoire are a part of their cultural patrimony. And in the United States, it is an imported art form. So as a result of it not being part of our cultural patrimony, opera in the United States has greater latitude to invent and reinvent. So there are more new works being performed in the US than anywhere else in the world, and we are free to create a new form of opera, an American opera, because it's not part of our cultural inheritance. And I mean, it was so perfect, because it's true. Like, we didn't, when opera began, we didn't have, or even the U.S., when the U.S. was formed, we didn't have any sort of operas being composed in the United States. I think the first American opera wasn't composed until the 1800s. And partly that was because opera was banned in the colonies and in the United States for like the first, I don't know, like 30 to 40 years or something. And then like the first true opera season didn't occur until like 1825. And that was when Manuel Garcia and his opera troupe came over and presented opera in New York and kind of sent a craze through the societies there, because they hadn't had access to that sort of thing. And just kind of the legacy that, American opera is different and will always be different, because we don't have to be so tied to canon pieces by Verdi and Mozart and Wagner and all of that. We can say, well, we have our own canon and we have our own tradition, and one of those traditions is this massive output of new opera.
Mm-hmm. And I think that it just goes into the whole idea of what, as we were told as kids, at least I assume you were too, that America is a melting pot. Mm-hmm. And so if we look at operas like, there are probably some people who might want to create quote unquote patriotic operas, but we can take the best of all the cultures that are coming to our country and then put that into our operas and make them more relatable. Because again, it's a language, or at least it's perceived that it's a language that people won't understand. Well, that's how we get around it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that was a really great quote, really hit it on the nail.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was the best way to state how the environment of opera in the U.S. is very different from Europe, from a cultural standpoint and from a budgetary standpoint too, because in Germany, like the government supports the productions. I think it's between 40 and 60% of the money comes from the government. And I think it is similar in Italy as well. Whereas like in the United States, most of the money comes from fundraising, from donors, only like, it's usually only around like 30% actually comes from tickets being sold. And then the rest is filled in by grants and stuff. Okay, so This is kind of like our segue into pop culture. I want to kind of share this article that I found via another podcast. I found a podcast that was talking about opera in popular culture. And they mentioned this article, and I went and, was reading through it. So it's Expecting Rain, Opera as Popular Culture by John Story. And kind of the most interesting thing I found in there was about the progression of opera into high culture art, how this happened. And he really comes at it from a societal standpoint, and being a musicologist, we can't just put it on society. There also was a movement by composers, particularly by people like Wagner and Meyerbeer, to create, in Wagner's, it was Gesamtkunstwerk, this idea that all of the arts come together and make this very elevated art form. And, Meyerbeer was doing grand opera, and kind of all the composers kind of started to follow suit for a while. In the article, he talks about how between 1825 and 1850s, elite social groups in New York in particular, because even today, New York is kind of the center of opera in the United States. There's something like 40% of the opera companies are based in New York. It's a lot. But they developed 3 overlapping strategies to separate opera from the everyday world of popular entertainment. And the first was to separate it from any other theater by establishing a building specifically for performing opera. The second was to make a code of behavior, including dress code, that was deemed proper for attending the opera. And then finally, they insisted on only foreign languages being presented as the standard of excellence. Of course, this is going to alienate everyday people. If you make it harder to get to the building, harder to get into the building, and harder to understand what's on stage, are you going to want to go?
Nope. And if you're an elitist, it worked like a charm.
And I think that this is where most people get the idea that opera is elitist, and where, you have to dress a certain way to go to the opera. You have to have an understanding of foreign languages to go to the opera. And that opera is only at an opera house, which today is just very far from the truth. I mean, we have organizations that sing operas in bars, that sing opera. I mean, opera happens on cruise ships now. I don't really consider cruises high class. I mean, I'm sure there are really nice ones, but they're pretty affordable for the average person if you budget.
Yeah.
Anyways, opera is available outside of the opera house, and has been for a really long time. It's not a new idea that opera is only in the opera house.
What's so interesting too that a lot of people don't realize is often how much they actually don't notice that it's actually there, right? We've talked about commercials and how it's in movies, and everybody knows that if you need a structured settlement and you need cash now because of opera, you call J.G. Wentworth. We all know this. 877 cash now. But also, even stuff like if you go onto Spotify, I was going to the gym the other day looking for a playlist, and there was one that I found called Pop Songs Based on Classical Music. I was like, that's interesting. So I go in there, and they'll give you the pop song, and then the next track is the classical piece that it was based off of.
Cool.
They're doing some of the legwork for us. Now, granted, they're not all opera, but
yeah,
the idea that classical music is like only for snooty rich people. Mm-hmm. I mean, how often do we just like stop and listen to classical music when it's in a place that we're not expecting it, like malls? Like, you can even think about carolers at Christmas. Yep. That's generally speaking not pop music. They're
right.
like,
yeah, because they're supposed to pay for those royalties.
Well, yeah, there is that, but I'm just saying, like, people do often just stop and listen to these quartets that are being sung, and musically speaking, they shouldn't. If we go off of what we're told is popular in the United States, to be like, oh, that's just a bunch of weirdos over there, singing Christmas songs, dressed in funky attire.
It is kind of like funny, like the places that opera in particular pops up, like we talked about with ads in particular. Lakme's duet, you hear that all the time in ads, and you hear I don't think you hear Ride of the Valkyries that much. Oh yeah, you hear Carmen all the time in ads, the habanera in particular. That one's always used. They never use the Sega Dia, which I prefer.
Yeah.
And then I don't know, is Sesame Street still popular?
Sort of.
Because like
I mean,
opera
I don't
was
know.
opera was
My
on that
kids
a
are older
lot
now.
when we were growing up, in movies in general. I mean, I'll admit, I don't watch a lot of movies, so I haven't seen many movies in the last 5 years. So I don't know if there is like what movies have used opera in the last 5 years. I mean, I can, always talk about like the Apocalypse Now and the Ride of the Valkyries and Moonstruck and Pretty Woman, Shawshank Redemption. Those all have opera in them.
Yeah.
Silence of the Lambs. It's mostly like all the stuff I know is from when I was growing up and watching more movies. So I'm not hip with what's going on right now.
You're not hip to be squared.
Yeah.
Or whatever the saying is.
But things that are a part of popular culture, hip hop and rap music are the most popular music right now. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that there's been some sampling done. I don't know any of the. If any of our listeners are hip hop heads and know of hip hop songs that have operatic samples in them, send us a comment or whatever with what they are. We'd love to know.
Yeah, exactly.
And then like musicals that are inspired by opera, a couple on the list. Rent, that's inspired by La Boheme. Miss Saigon is inspired by Madame Butterfly, and Aida is inspired by Aida.
Yeah. And just in case we haven't mentioned it before, Phantom of the Opera is not an opera.
not
Just
an
because it takes place in an opera house doesn't make it an opera. Just like, Sweeney Todd is not a piece about the meat pie business. Okay?
Yeah.
Just because it takes place in a meat pie shop.
Yeah, other places where opera shows up in popular culture. My boyfriend mentioned home movies had like a rock opera thing.
Oh, yeah.
And then we have like all of these opera pop artists, as I'll call them. Josh Groban, Il Divo, Il Volo, Bocelli, Sarah Brightman, Katherine Jenkins. These are pretty popular. I mean, they're all millionaires.
Mm-hmm. So there's something to be said there.
Yeah, they're obviously cashing in some money that we're not. And then, I guess we have to talk about the Met in HD.
Yeah.
Because that made opera available to people outside of the opera house and a movie theater. You can go watch it in a movie theater.
Well, I mean, you can maybe make the argument that was the gateway drug to opera being more in homes. Between that and YouTube, I would say.
Yeah,
yeah. Because if you have the accessibility issue because you don't live near New York, you go to a movie theater, that's good enough for most people. And again, they're not worried about what they're going to wear because it's obviously not the same. But, if they can get it now in their house.
Yeah, or via iTunes. I don't remember where I read this statistic, but like 12% of all iTunes sales were like from classical music. So, I mean, that's a lot. 12%.
Yeah.
And then the last thing is, as we're talking about opera in pop culture or pop culture in opera, you can kind of turn it on its head too. I know this is like 50 years ago, but Tommy, The Who, their rock opera, which if you haven't seen the film, amazing.
Yeah, that's really good.
Pinball Wizard, can't go wrong. Or Tina Turner as the Acid Queen, also can't go wrong.
That's right.
But very cool fact, Seattle Opera premiered it on their stage in 1971, and Bette Midler was the Acid Queen.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Interesting. I wonder how long it took them to be like, yeah, we're just going to go with the ring cycle. We're not going to be famous for this rock opera.
Yeah, I wonder, was Spate Jenkins part of the company at that time? I don't think he was. I think that was before his time.
Yeah, probably not. Yeah.
I don't know if he would have approved. He's still alive. He could tell us.
That's true.
Anyways, so if we talk about like pop culture influencing opera, I mean, there's a Steve Jobs opera.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that's definitely informing what people are interested in. And there's The Shining, The Handmaid's Tale. What other ones can I think of?
Well, yeah, there's so many. There was one that was a Tinder opera.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that one. Mm-hmm.
There was one, I don't know if it actually got produced, that was like a Breaking Bad opera.
Right.
There's all kinds of stuff now, really in the last 10 years, not so much prior to that, where people are like, you know what, screw it, I'm just going to do whatever. And so they are taking really big chances with stuff that's in our culture, even if it's really hot button topic. You mentioned the Central Park Five.
Right. Oh yeah, there's
another
2019/2020 was actually a really good year for composition. There were a ton of new works, and particularly new works by women composers that were performed in 2020.
And I think the other thing that composers I have learned from the new operas that I have seen is that the whole idea of, you know what, I'm going to be an opera composer and I'm going to make this music so mathematical or so music theory based instead of actually being listenable, singable. Those people went out the window and they're now writing stuff that people actually want to perform.
Yeah, thank God. On an academic level, I can appreciate atonal music.
Yeah. That's as far as it goes for me. And even then, that's pushing it.
Yeah. Yeah, to sing some, I've sung some atonal work, and it's hard. It is so hard. Way harder than it needs to be. and thank goodness that there are people, that there are singers that really specialize in that sort of thing. And yeah, I'm glad that they specialize it, so I don't have to. And they make it sound great.
That's true, because they work so hard. And what's interesting, if you are one of those specialists and those shows keep coming up, it's weird how fast those things get back into my brain, or back into your brain. I remember I did a show with Inland Northwest Opera. It was this outreach show, and it was super atonal, but it was supposed to be performed for kids, and it's about this toy maker and all this stuff. You would think it'd be all happy-go-lucky music, other than, the moments in the show where it's dramatically not smart to do that. But I got called to do it really last minute, and as soon as I got the call, I was like, well, shit. This took me forever to get in my brain. I only have, because I had to replace somebody, I only had a few rehearsals before, but you actually do that music, it comes back pretty quick, and then it, for some reason, makes sense to you.
Yeah.
I don't know if it made sense to everybody else, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. Also, the band Cake has a song about an opera singer.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. It's a good song. Going back to this definition of opera being compared to a dead language, and particularly the language itself is dying. I think the vast number of compositions and new productions that are being done by companies in the U.S. is grounds to say that no, opera is not dying, and it's still persisting and being relevant in pop culture. Maybe it's not the element of pop culture, and that's fine. Attention spans are it's so
in short supply,
easy to get distracted these days. Oh my gosh, especially with things like TikTok.
Yep,
I don't want to admit I don't have TikTok. I do get on Instagram Reels sometimes, and I spend more time than I probably should on there.
I've done that too.
It's kind of fun. I find it. I think it could be really interesting for someone to write a little opera series on something like TikTok. Actually write an opera for that, not just do opera on it. I think it could be really interesting.
Yeah, that would be.
Yeah. In our minds, opera's not dying yet.
No, definitely not. I think it's like a phoenix that's about to rise.
Yeah.
Or you can maybe relate it to Bitcoin earlier this last year.
Yeah.
Bitcoin was kind of noodling, and then it just took off.
Yeah.
Right? I think that moving forward, opera, once it kind of consolidates after the pandemic, which probably with certain companies, this is already starting to happen in terms of the organizational aspect of it and the vision, and now they just need to implement that vision as things open up completely. But yeah, I think it's going to definitely get better over time, especially if companies look to their younger employees and singers. And this isn't an ageist thing. I'm not saying that older folks don't have good ideas, but if you're looking at how to use technology and how people use it in their everyday lives,
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, someone who's over 50 doesn't probably know as much as a person who's 20 and has had, Facebook their entire
and also
life.
to figure out what is trending. Like, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not afraid to admit, I'm 32 and I don't know what's trending. I might have like a few ideas, but overall, like, I don't know what's fashionable. I don't know if my partner hadn't told me that hip hop and rap is the most popular music in the world. I wouldn't have known. I would have thought it was just pop music.
Yeah.
I just, I've never really been concerned with what's trending in my life. It's just never been something that I cared about. So I'm not the person to necessarily ask about those sort of things because I just get interested in what I'm interested in and I enjoy it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think definitely paying attention to your younger audience members or people who work at your company. Yeah. Getting their input. This is an area, maybe they don't have the experience in a lot of other ways, but this is the thing that they have the knowledge about. And we need to value that and learn from that and build on that.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so I think that's going to wrap up our episode for today and for this season. Looking forward, we are definitely we didn't do any interviews in this first season. And, we had kind of talked about it, but, with the pandemic, it kind of made it hard. I mean, Mike and I do our recording in separate places. But, not everybody has the same setup that we do and is as tech savvy. So we didn't want to worry about it. And we had plenty of content to present to you throughout this first season to fill things up. So we're definitely going to have some interviews next season. And, we've already talked about trying to put a production together. So I got to get rolling on that.
Yeah, definitely. So thanks so much for everybody checking us out, telling all your friends, helping us grow this thing.
Yeah.
We're excited for all the things coming up, but
I just have to mention it's insane to me that in 1 year we went from 0 Instagram followers and we're almost at 1,000.
Yeah.
We're only 10 away. So I guess we'll have to figure out something to do for our 1,000 followers.
So if you guys want something cool and extra,
woo woo,
tell some more friends. Just say, hey, listen to this podcast. It doesn't even have to be this one that we're talking about. Maybe it's a different one that you like. I'm like, hey, tag a friend or whatever, and then they can like it,
Yep.
And then we can put something together because we are really, really close. And honestly, that's exploded over the last 2 or 3 months.
Yeah, it's just insane. I mean, I don't think either of us really expected it to kind of take off the way it did. But we're glad that people are enjoying our content. And we don't do this to make money. I mean, money's nice to have. But we do this because we enjoy it. Yeah. If you want to throw a few bucks our way, we're more than welcome to take it.
Yeah. Yeah, we won't turn that down. That's for sure.
And we are always open to your suggestions and requests when it comes to content. So let us know what if there's something we haven't talked about and you're like, why haven't they talked about this? Mm-hmm. We're only 2 people. We only have 2 minds. Like we said, they get easily distracted. So
wait, what are we doing?
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks for listening to this podcast episode. We hope you enjoyed it. We'd love to hear your thoughts and requests, so leave us a comment below. For more information about the podcast or for extras, check out our Patreon page, www.patreon.com/operaunbound. You can help support the creation of this and much more content for as little as $3 a month. Like and subscribe to our channel, and also follow us on Instagram at operaunbound to stay updated. Ciao!